The purpose of this video is not to expose all of the suspicious behavior of Secret Service members in connection with President Kennedy's assassination, as much of that has been covered elsewhere. Rather, in this video, we will examine only that suspicious behavior of Special Agents William Greer, driver of the President's limousine, and Roy Kellerman, riding in the right front passenger seat. The first instance of their behavior, which is nothing short of criminal, is covered in a series wherein we prove the first shot striking the President penetrated the windshield from the front to enter his throat just under the knot in his tie. However, if you haven't seen clues 2 and 3 of this series, here is a very brief summary of clue number 2's salient point, which is that the first shot actually hitting the President was fired from the western entry of a pedestrian tunnel under the Triple Railroad underpass, where a second assassin was perched over the open steel door of a large electrical utility closet. The bullet from that shot traversed Dealey Plaza, as seen above, then pierced the limousine's windshield, as seen in the diagram above, just to the driver's side of the rear view mirror, passing between agents Greer and Kellerman, then between Governor and Mrs. Connolly, to strike the President in the throat, exit his back after bruising the top of his right lung, and then bounce harmlessly off the pavement or the Daltex building behind. We prove that using the Alchins photo seen above, the statements of 6 credible witnesses, including 2 Dallas policemen, 1 doctor, 1 reporter, 1 Secret Service agent in the White House garage later that evening, and the man who actually removed and replaced the windshield at the Ford Motor Company the following Monday, all of whom saw the clear through and through bullet hole in the front windshield. This fact has remained unknown for 60 years because the bullet wound in the back was misdiagnosed by the pathologists at the Bethesda autopsy that evening as an entry wound, as shown above on their original autopsy diagram, because they could not probe the bullet track deeper than 1.5 to 3/4 of an inch. They assumed the bullet had struck the President in the back and simply fallen out. However, the actual reason they couldn't probe it is because, as seen above in Superior number 198, as President Kennedy goes behind the Stemmons Freeway sign and out of sight, he was waving to the crowd when he was struck in the throat, thus lifting his right arm and elevating and moving his scapula, allowing the bullet, after entering his throat and bruising the top of his right lung, to exit under the uplifted scapula, as seen in the illustration on the left above. Now, please note in the illustration on the right above how when the President's scapula descended to its normal resting position, as it would have been at autopsy, the scapula and scapular muscles have closed and covered and obscured the bullet track, and any attempt to probe the wound would have been blocked by the now lowered scapula. This is why the bullet track could not be found or probed. In this photo, which we'll soon revisit, taken only seconds before the President is first hit, note the path of that bullet. And now, please note just how low that rear view mirror is mounted upon the windshield. So what is this first instance of Agents Greer and Kellerman's criminal behavior? Simply this: they perjured themselves in sworn testimony before the Warren Commission, wherein they failed to reveal the very existence of this bullet hole. Well, perhaps they just didn't see the hole? No, that's just not credible. In fact, one or both of them not only couldn't have missed seeing the bullet hole, but they may well have been hit by spraying glass, as the President was. For after the autopsy, mortician Edwin Bates of the Gawler Funeral Home, who helped prepare the body for burial, discovered two holes in the president's right cheek caused by flying glass particles from which embalming fluid was leaking and he had to plug. Now let's move on to the second instance of very suspicious behavior, this time on the part of the driver Greer. You've doubtless watched the Zapruder films many times, and like me, that 4.9-second interval from where we first noticed JFK has been hit in frame 225 above as he emerges from behind the Stemmons freeway sign until 313 when he's hit with the fatal shot, which I've blacked out here to avoid YouTube descriptions, seems like an eternity. It has always seemed to me, and still does, that after 1 or 2 seconds the driver should have reacted by immediately accelerating as he had been trained and thus saving the president's life. However, we know that instead of accelerating the vehicle, the driver actually braked and slowed the vehicle, and indeed turned around and watched the president until after his head exploded with the fatal shot, as seen here in Zapruder frame 316. Now, the government and other of Greer's apologists claim that Greer simply reacted slowly as he was caught simply unaware and totally unprepared. However, I don't agree, and by using two photographs seen earlier here and taken just before the actual shooting of the president, that Greer was not unaware, but rather was in a state of alert anticipation just before the first shot. Seen here on Main Street moments earlier, we can see that Greer has both hands on the limousine steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. Now please note the location of the automatic transmission shift lever here, and in two enlargements taken from the rear of the car that morning at the airport. Note that the lever is forward and below of the steering wheel. Here's another view, but taken from a contemporaneous stock Lincoln Continental, showing the lever position. Now returning to this photo of the presidential limousine on Elm Street, just seconds before the first shot, please note the attitude of Governor Connolly's head as he looks to his left. Now viewing Zapruder frame number 159, notice how we cannot see Governor Connolly's face, but only the back of his head, because this frame was taken at the same instant as the previous photo. Here, one Zapruder frame later at number 160, we begin to see Connolly's face as he turns his head back to his right, and more so again at frame 162, and finally his full face is visible here at Zapruder frame 164. This is important because frame number 159 of the Zapruder film gives us a clock to establish the time of this previous photo. And as this previous photo was taken at the same instant of Zapruder frame number 159, and as the president was struck with the fatal headshot at Zapruder frame number 313, with the camera running at 18 frames per second, this photo was taken about 8.5 seconds before the fatal headshot. Now, looking more closely at the photo, notice the driver's right hand position. It is clearly not on the steering wheel, as it was a few moments earlier as seen here above, but his hand is now on the shift lever and underneath the steering wheel as can be seen above. By the blue arrow above, we see the travel of direction of the limousine, yet the driver isn't looking where he's going. Rather, his head is turned to his right as he's very intently watching the president in the rearview mirror. It seems as if, with one hand on the shift lever and his watching the president, He's already prepared himself to react to something involving the president that has yet to happen, here several seconds before the first shot is heard. So it can't be said that he was caught unaware, can it? So the driver was not alerted to the president's being in mortal danger at only about 4.5 seconds at the sound of the first shot, but the driver was fully prepared for something at 8.5 seconds before that fatal shot, and still not only failed to accelerate the limousine out of danger, but actually braked to keep the vehicle on a straight and slow course, while then turning to watch the president until after he was hit with the fatal shot, to only then accelerate the limousine out of danger. All of his actions and inactions here leading me to believe that if he weren't an accomplice to the plot, he'd certainly do nicely until one showed up. Now we'll move on to his boyfriend, Kellerman, in the right front passenger seat, seen here looking in his rear view mirror, watching the president or the agents in the follow-up car. Which of those he's watching in that mirror, I don't know. But what I do know is he certainly isn't watching the crowd to his right for any potential threat to the president. Now let's look at his seating position in the front seat. But before we do, please notice the empty distance between the two men. Ordinarily, on motorcades outside Washington, D.C., one of two of the president's military aides would be seated here as shown in the center. But oddly, although both were present in the motorcade that day, they had been relegated to vehicles further back in the parade. Had either been seated in the normal seating position above in the center, they would have blocked the line of sight aim of the second assassin in the Commerce Street tunnel, making hitting the president in the back seat impossible. Notice in this Elchin's photo, taken perhaps 1 or 2 seconds after the second shot, which struck the president in the throat after having pierced the windshield from the front, how Agent Kellerman in the right front seat has crowded himself hard against the door, just as if he is trying to get as far away from the center of that windshield as is possible. And keep in mind, neither he nor Special Agent Greer driving never admitted there was a bullet hole, not crack, but a bullet hole in the windshield, as seen by all the very credible witnesses mentioned earlier. Further, upon leaving Andrews Air Force Base, Agent Greer takes it upon himself to take the place of the Navy corpsman assigned to drive the ambulance, and drove the ambulance containing the president's body to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy. Upon arriving there after dropping off the First Lady and Robert Kennedy at the hospital entrance, and some further delay, Greer again takes control of the ambulance. In the meantime, the Joint Services casket team has been helicoptered to Bethesda, where they are placed in a pickup truck and were awaiting to follow the ambulance and unload the president's coffin at the entrance to the hospital morgue at the other side of the hospital. Keep in mind it's now well after dark. With Greer at the wheel, the ambulance then suddenly took off at a high rate of speed and turned off its lights, thus with the pickup containing the casket bearers in pursuit, losing the ambulance and driving around the huge complex several times for what Honor Guard member Hugh Clark estimated to be at least 15 to 20 minutes. Meanwhile, during that wild search, a second black ambulance arrived outside the morgue, where the Navy corpsmen all present at the morgue saw a gray military shipping casket containing the president's body brought into the morgue by men in dark civilian suits. Later, the gray Navy ambulance arrived at the same morgue entry where it was spotted by the honor guard in the pickup truck, who then unloaded the bronze ornamental casket from Dallas they believed contained the president's body. But it didn't. I believe it was Greer's role to take control of the ambulance and thus the body to ensure that the president's body was transferred to the plotters and the wounds altered before the autopsy to conform with the official narrative that the president had been shot only from above and behind by the lone nut Lee Oswald. And finally, Please click on the link above to see the evidence and logic concerning the question of Lee Oswald's guilt or innocence.